Okay, so the topics today is Monarchs of Marin, a practical guide to helping them survive. Um, just by way of background, the Marin Master Gardeners, this is typical of the type of work we do, which is it's not your great aunt, giving you folklore. This is based on scientific research. It's all public information that I've used, so it's not really opinion, but rather a culmination of current thinking about the monarch butterfly population here in Marin County. In terms of what we're going to cover today, first, a brief introduction to the Western monarch butterfly, to give you a sense of their life style, their patterns, and therefore why they have issues. A bit of a discussion of why do they need our help, and then primarily the focus is going to be what can we do practically in terms of creating what are called monarch way stations, discussion of do's and don'ts with milkweed, which is an area where there's a lot of misconceptions, varieties that do well here in Marin County, plus a little bit of discussion of other things that can be done to help them out. So to begin, the monarch butterfly, Danaus plexipus, is the binomial mean. It's found throughout the United States. It's probably one of the better known butterflies. And the really outstanding feature that makes people think about them is their lengthy migrations. These are butterflies that will do multiple generation migrations up and down the East Coast. In fact, for those of us who grew up on the East Coast, that's the thing that stands out is they start out in Mexico in the spring, go all the way up as far as Canada, and then turn around and come back again, which is pretty amazing. Particularly if you look at the life cycle of a monarch butterfly, it's not that long. The eggs, typically take 3 to 5 days to hatch. Then you have the larvae, which is the picture in the upper right here, the caterpillar stage, which is about 10 days to 2 weeks. And then they go into a chrysalis form, which is basically a cocoon, and they'll spend about 10 to 14 more days in that cocoon, basically going through a metamorphosis from a caterpillar to a butterfly. And then the final stage is the butterfly itself. It's 5 to 6 weeks lifespan for most of them. And the lower right picture here is one of a butterfly that has just come out of its chrysalis. They come out full grown, and it takes them a little while to get their wings to stiffen up and so on, but they're good to go. Now, as I said, for Easterners, that whole image of the monarchs is this incredible migration between the far north and their overwintering grounds in Mexico. This being California, the Western monarch does things a little bit differently, which is more of a east-west migration, moving from their summer grounds up to the north and to the Rocky Mountain area, coming west to the coastal region of California. Most of the Western monarchs that migrate will spend the winter in an area. The far north is up around in Mendocino, just above us, and all the way down to the Baja. Now, they go through in the winter a quiet period called the diapause, basically November to February. And if you're thinking back to my saying the average monarch lives 5 to 6 weeks as a butterfly, getting from November to February is a long call. So what the butterflies do is they go into a very low level of activity. They will occasionally flutter about to keep warm and maybe to find some food to eat, but otherwise they are inactive. And we'll come back to that when we're talking about the types of milkweeds that you should and should not have in this area. So after that quiet period through the end of February, they do begin their breeding cycle and the migration back to wherever they like to spend their summers. So it's early March now. We're just starting to see the migration start. More so the guys down in the Southern California, but up here in the Marin area, to the extent that they're overwintering here, the migration is about to begin. Now, the question, why do they need our help? The simple fact is there's been a catastrophic decline in numbers. The Xerces Society, which is one of the leading organizations in knowledge of butterflies and campaigning for them, has been doing what they call a Thanksgiving count since 1997. Volunteers going out to the overwintering sites and counting the butterflies, which back in 97 was a pretty daunting task because they counted 1.2 million butterflies. This past Thanksgiving, 2020, it wasn't such a daunting task because there weren't any. They found a total of 1,900 butterflies at 250 different places they went to looking for the butterflies. Pretty catastrophic. In recent years, the numbers have been more like around 30 to 50,000. So this drop is just, it's got people scared, obviously. Question, why? Why are the numbers dropping so dramatically? And there are a number of theories. One is the loss of habitat. A lot of areas have been developed for housing, agriculture, and industry, and so on. That used to be places that the butterflies hung out and where their food sources were. The second issue is the use of pesticides, which is obviously rough on the insects. This is particularly an issue in the Central Valley, which is part of their migration pattern is to get through there, and there's a lot of pesticides out there. And then the final thing is climate change. This has a couple of effects. One is with the warmer, milder winters, there's some thinking that we have more what are called resident butterflies now that don't migrate. But you're also having things like the fires that we've experienced the last couple of years, which have taken out a lot of habitat and been done a lot of damage to the population. So there's some tough situation for the butterfly population. And the solution to this is statewide. It's not something that we can solve just ourselves here in Marin County, but there are things that we can do and should be doing here in Marin to do our part to try to support the monarch population. The first is the concept of monarch way stations. And basically, people are being encouraged to create a positive environment, a habitat for these butterflies. First, foremost, is a reliable source of food and shelter for both the resident and the migrating butterflies. Food, flowers, nectar, pollen, water, protected areas, areas that are not inundated with pesticides. All of those things are features of creating a positive environment for the butterflies in your neighborhood. Second is milkweed, and we'll be spending a lot of today talking about milkweed. It is a key component of the monarch life cycle. In both cases, it's good, just nectar plants in general, but also milkweed is best to plant in swaths to attract their attention, something eye-catching so that they're not having to root and peck around trying to find these plants. And as I said, other sources of nectar are also very important to the adults. The milkweed is much more important to the early stages. Once they're adults, they can really feed off of any plant that has nectar or pollen. So focusing on the milkweed, why is it so important? It is basically the monarch host plant. The larvae feed exclusively on milkweed, and obviously the mature butterflies only lay their eggs on milkweed. During this 2-week period, the the larvae will consume a lot of the plant. I mean, I was kind of freaked out the first year they came into my garden, and I'd carefully, nurtured all these milkweeds, and the leaves are gone. I mean, they just ate the whole thing, which is fine because they regenerate pretty quickly. And it's obviously for a good cause. Now, in addition to the nutritional value of eating the leaves, the eating these leaves is a key defense mechanism for the monarchs, because basically the milkweed leaves contain a sort of a toxic alkaloid. It's called cardiac glycosides, that the monarchs absorb into their body, into their wings, and to their body. And this provides a natural defense from predators. A bird may eat one monarch early in its life, but it learns that, this is bad news. And so they learn not to eat these guys. And so, it's the key defense mechanism for these animals. Now, in terms of the native milkweed plants, here are some of the basic characteristics of these. First, they are deciduous perennials, which means that they will die back in the winter, but they do come back in the springtime, so that's quite all right. In terms of the environment, they require full sun, which is defined as 6 or more hours a day of sunlight. They prefer good drainage. They don't like to have wet roots, but they will tolerate clay, which is obviously important for us here in Marin County. And they are a drought-tolerant plant once you've got it established. Now, the first year or so, you probably do need to water it a fair amount to help it get going. But once it's got its root structure in there, it doesn't need a whole lot of water in the summertime. And the good news is they are deer resistant, which is also obviously important here in Marin. In terms of characteristics, there are a wide variety of plant forms of the milkweed. The one thing that they all have in common is their flower structure. And that is basically a combination of what are called corollas and coronas. The corollas are the upper part, and in the picture you're looking at now, it's sort of whitish pale pink side. And the corona are petals that are bent back away from the corona. So in this case, it's the darker pink. Now, in a few slides, when we look at the various milkweeds that people can grow here in the area, look at the flowers, and you'll see this recurring pattern. Coming back to general characteristics, sort of a neat thing about the milkweeds is their fruit is a pod. It splits open in the late fall, and it just releases thousands of these seeds that are just these fluffy hairs. It's a very outstanding feature. And the other common characteristic they all have is the milky sap, which is where the milkweed gets its name. It contains those irritants that we were talking about earlier, the toxic substances. These can be toxic to animals, and this is one reason the habitat is reduced. Is if you're a dairy farmer in Western Marin and you see a patch of this, you don't want your cows eating this. They're going to get sick, so you're going to pull it out. It's a natural thing for them to do. So, question: Where to plant the milkweed? It's a pretty adaptable plant, and it's very easy to grow throughout the state of California. It's found, in the mountains, in the deserts, here in the coast, and so on. This is an area that it took me a while to understand it, but the most common recommendation is do not plant milkweed within 5 miles of a monarch overwintering site. And the reason is we don't want to disrupt the monarch migration and the diapause. Remember when I was talking about the life cycle, the diapause, they really shouldn't be eating milkweed. It's sort of like Lent, you're not supposed to do things that are fun, party, and you're not supposed to have sex. So no laying eggs on milkweed during the diapause phase. And the question of where is safe to plant is compounded by the fact that these overwintering sites vary over time. They do tend to be close to the coast, but it's not always in the same locations. So the broad recommendation that is given to people is that do not plant milkweed within 5 miles of the coast. For those of us living here in Marin, what does this mean? Well, the dotted black line is roughly the 5 mile line. And what that means is that if you're out in Western Marin, in the Point Reyes area, down in the beach communities like Bolinas and Stinson Beach, and even Sausalito and parts of Mill Valley, you are discouraged from growing milkweed. Okay, there are other things that you can do, but you're asked not to do that. Points to the north and east of that, so if you get up into San Rafael and Novato and the northern part of the county, you're encouraged. Please do plant the milkweed because you're going to get migratory butterflies coming through, and also the rest. It's just a good food source. Now, the question, well, which milkweed do I want to plant? There actually are 14 different types of milkweed that are native to California. And they are, very specialized in their habitats. Some of them grow up in the mountains at high altitudes. Some grow out in the desert areas. Where we are, which is sort of a coastal scrub region, there are probably the two that are best known. And there's the Asclepius Fasciculars and Esclepius Speciosa. I'll give you their common names in a minute. The advantage of these is they're fairly easy to find in nurseries. Or for those of you who are daring, you can raise them from seeds or cuttings. The drawback to these is they don't break their dormancy until late spring. So these guys don't really come out of the ground until about April or May. And you remember, March and April is when the migration is occurring. So by the time these guys come up, most of the migrating butterflies have already come and gone. There is a less common option, Asclepius areocarpa. The advantage of this is that it is earlier in the spring that it comes out. The disadvantage is it's really hard to come by. I've only seen it at 2 native plant nurseries here in the Bay Area. So you really have to hunt if that's the plant that you want to put in. So going into these 3 plants in a little more detail, the Esclepius Fascicular, commonly known as the narrow leaf milkweed. And if you look at this picture, you can see where it gets its name. It has these long, narrow leaves. It's typically grows about 3 feet high. It's a fairly narrow plant. It's only about 1 foot wide. It blooms in the summer and the fall. The flowers are white with lavender, and you can see here, the white is the corolla, and the lavender is the corona. So they have the opposing, 5 up, 5 down characteristic. These plants are fairly short-lived, but the good news is that they self-seed, which means once you get a bed established, they will reproduce themselves without too much encouragement. The second common one around here, the Esclepius Speciosa, is called the showy milkweed. And notice the difference here in the leaves. You had the very slender, long, narrow leaves at the last plant. These are much larger, what are called opposing leaves. And this is the thing, the milkweeds, they have lots of different looks, but once again, if you look at those flowers, you go, okay, 5 up, 5 down, that's a milkweed. This is a later blooming, and just really full summer is when this comes out with its flowers, sort of a combination of white, pink, and purple colors. This, once again, will come back on its own. If you want to propagate it, you can cut off some of the root structure. They're called the rhizomes, which is what they use to spread the plant themselves. You can dig up and cut up some of those and root those and spread your bed that way. Let me. I should have gotten rid of my telephone. I'm sorry. Okay, so where was I? The third one, the Asclepius areocarpa, is it called a woolly pod or an Indian milkweed? It's once again a tall, narrow plant, though it does have fairly wide leaves. This blooms earlier, it comes up out of the ground earlier, it blooms earlier, and it's a sort of a mix of the cream, pink, and white. As I said, this is a plant you really have to hunt for if you want it, but it's great if you can have it in place for the migratory butterflies. I'd like to touch upon one more milkweed that we see here in Marin a lot. That's the Esclepius curassivica, which is called the tropical or the blood milkweed. This is the milkweed that you will most typically find in your neighborhood nursery. It is not a native to California. It comes from Mexico, and it is not deciduous. It doesn't die back in the winter like the natives do. And that's one of the drawbacks of this plant is that, if you've got this, it can disrupt the migration and the diapause because the butterflies are going by and go, oh, look, there's some pretty yellow and red flowers. I think I'll hover down there and lay some eggs and have a little snack and so on. But equally important is that this particular plant is the host to the spores of a protozoan parasite, Ophrocystis electrocera, which is a real mouthful. Most people just call it OE. And these parasites multiply over time. And when the butterflies land on this plant, the parasites get on the butterflies and they get absorbed by the butterfly, and it does a lot of bad things to them. It stunts their growth, it reduces their ability to reproduce, and it's can actually kill the butterfly. I had one in my backyard who was coming out of its chrysalis stage, and it couldn't get out of it because the wings just wouldn't develop. And I think it was this OE that did it. So if you have one of these plants in your yard, cut it down in the fall. Okay, for the two reasons. One is it's not going to be disruptive to the natural cycle of the butterflies, but also even more important is the plant starts all over again in terms of generating this parasite. So you don't have to dig this out of your garden if you like it, but please cut it down. But we do actually encourage, replace it with a native species if you can, or certainly the next time you want to put a milkweed in your garden. Now, keeping in the theme of things that can be bad in milkweed land, the other is the milkweed aphid. And any of you who have milkweeds, this is a very familiar sight. These little guys, it's amazing how quickly they multiply. You go out and see a couple of them on your plant one day, and you come out the next day and it's like this picture. It's just absolutely covered with these things. The aphids feed on the plant sap. They don't bother the monarchs particularly. They can coexist. And the damage to the plant is usually aesthetic. It takes a really massive infestation for it to harm the plant. But if you find this unsightly or it is harming the plant, there are ways to deal with this. One is you can take your garden hose and just spray these guys off of the plant. Or, as I prefer, manual intervention. You just go in there and start squishing them, and you get nice yellow fingers by the time you're done, but your plant's happier, and so are the monarchs. What we discourage is the use of insecticides. And for the simple reason that in the process of killing the aphids, you're going to kill any monarch larvae in the plants, and you're also going to kill the beneficial insects that prey on the aphids. So it's a mixed blessing to do that. So please use water, go in manually. If you need to spray something on it, use something like a neem oil, which is more organic and less damage to the butterflies. Now, in addition to milkweed, it's also important to provide a source of nectar for the butterflies, and not just in the spring or in the fall. A good monarch way station will have a variety of flowering plants that'll provide nectar from the early spring through the late fall. And this is where those of us who are on the coast can also do our part, even though we're discouraged from growing the milkweed, which is there are some plants that will flower in the wintertime, such as some of the manzanitas and the ribes and so on. And this is a source of nectar for those overwintering butterflies that wake up and feel the need for a snack. So, think in terms of having a steady flow of nectar-bearing flowers in your garden throughout the time that the butterflies are coming through. The second thing you can do is what they call be a citizen scientist. And there are various ways to do that. A lot of the focus has been helping to count the monarchs. As I was referring earlier, the Xerces Society does an annual Thanksgiving account where they go out to the overwintering sites and count the butterflies. Something that has started recently is called the Monarch Mystery Count, which runs from Valentine's Day to Earth Day. So this is going on right now. And what it involves is simply taking a picture of a monarch that you see and emailing it to a location. And the purpose of this is that they, one of the theories is that the real decline in the population occurs in the springtime, not in the winter. And so they're trying to get a sense of where the monarchs are in numbers, how far they're getting from their overwintering zones and so on. And so here's another way you can help. And third is we are seeing, it's not here on the slide, but we are seeing more and more activity here in Marin County where people are trying to do things to actively assist the monarchs outside of their own garden. To give you an example, the Marin chapters of the Audubon Society and the Native Plant Society have a joint venture now where the native plant people will raise the milkweed to a point where it's sustainable and turn them over to the Audubon folks, who then go out and they are planting these milkweeds to try to create new feeding stations for the monarchs. And for those of you who noticed in the paper, I think it was yesterday, the Marin County is announced, a more concerted effort to try to understand the needs of the monarchs and to help them survive here in Marin County. And finally, you can share your knowledge with others and support the pro-butterfly programs. If you see a tropical milkweed in your neighbor's yard, tell them to cut it down in the fall. Tell them it's for your own good. Okay. In terms of, if this has piqued your interest and you'd like to learn more, there's a ton of information on the internet. I would encourage starting at the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. They have been leaders in butterfly conservation for decades, and they are a well-established organization, and they're kind of leading the way in this whole thing. We have these other three with the Monarch name, the Alert, the Joint Venture, and the Watch. These are all specialized programs basically started at universities, but they're open to the general public. And then finally, there's the Environmental Action Committee of West Marin, obviously a local organization. They've been getting very active. And in fact, the Marin County initiative that I was just talking about is largely an outgrowth of this group. It's a coalition of various organizations who have been active in helping to promote the butterfly population. And I think, yep. So I'm going to wrap up now. In summary, obviously the Western monarch butterflies desperately need our help. The numbers are down. They're not extinct yet, but they're in bad shape. One of the theories about the small number of butterflies seen in the count this Thanksgiving, as I alluded earlier, is you're getting more of a resident population. And I've seen some references to estimates of about 12,000 butterflies living here in the Bay Area permanently. So making a monarch way station in your garden or your patio or wherever, can make a difference. Remember, plant the milkweed away from the coast. We don't want to disrupt the natural cycle. Offer a good mix of nectar sources, across the seasons, and use the native plants to the extent you can. The narrow leaf, the showy, the the Indian mallow, and go easy on the pesticides. And finally, share what you've learned with other folks. Spread the good word. So I think I'm going to shut down my share, and we can go on to questions if there are any.
Oh, there are quite a few questions. So I think you've already explained the types of milkweed people should be growing, but are any advice on where you can buy them or how to grow them from seeds?
Okay. The neighborhood nurseries are becoming more and more aware of the need to stock the native plants. The Native Plant Society has been going around proselytizing to them. But if your local doesn't have it, I would go to a native plant nursery. There's one at Tam Junction. There's one up in Point Reyes, and after that, you're probably going to go over to the East Bay over in Richmond. Go to Annie's Annuals, good old Annie's. These are all places that you can get natives. And frankly, it's a lot easier just to buy them than to grow them.
Okay. Can you grow milkweed in a container? Does it need to be a certain size container, like a potted milkweed?
Yeah, you can do it. I mean, I think you want a good size, not a 4-inch pot, but if you've got a couple of gallons, that's plenty.
Okay. So how can you tell where a monarch overwinters if you don't want to plant milkweed because they overwinter near you?
Well, see, that's the question. They do move. When I first came out here to Marin County, there was a population down in Fort Baker. They haven't been there for years. The biggest overwintering site that I know of here in Marin County is on some private property near Bolinas, but they have in the past been in Stinson Beach, and it's kind of hard to tell where they're going to pop up next, which is why the rule of thumb is if you're within that 5-mile zone, you're discouraged from planting milkweeds.
So sort of a follow-up to being close to the coast. Should you have milkweed if you live close to the bay?
Apparently, yes. And I do both. Once again, I do make a point, to be honest, is with the warmer, longer falls that we've been having, my milkweed isn't dying back when it's supposed to. And so basically in October, I go out and cut it down, and it serves the same purpose. So you're taking care of the resident population, but you're not disrupting the migration if you cut it down.
How do the monarchs find the milkweed? One person writes, they've ignored mine for 3 years. I've wondered if planting under trees is the problem. The milkweed narrowleaf is well established here in Novato.
Uh, well, for one thing, you do want a swath. The more you can bunch them together and have a big cluster, the more likely they are to catch sight of it and to move into it. I benefit from a neighbor a couple houses down who has a huge collection of milkweed. So, the monarchs are already in my neighborhood before I even had to look for them.
So the more planting you do, the more likely they'll find you.
Yeah, but they are free to choose.
Okay, so someone's in Marshall on Tomales Bay. Is that a place to avoid planting milkweed?
If you look at the back to the map, yeah, that's what's going to be considered within the 5-mile buffer.
Okay, so
and I will go off piste here. I do have friends in the Master Gardener organization who have milkweed, who live out in Point Reyes. We've discussed it, and we've reached a compromise, which is they cut it down in the fall, even though it's quite happy.
okay. So should you cut back your milkweed if caterpillars are present?
Oh, no,
Okay.
just the opposite. That's why you're growing the milkweed, is to attract the caterpillars.
So even if they're there in the fall?
I had an emotional issue with that this past fall, where we hadn't cut our milkweed down fast enough in the garden where I volunteer, and a butterfly laid eggs, and we had these caterpillars in November, and we really debated that, because you don't want new hatchlings coming out at a time when there's not a lot of food out there, but they're monarchs. What do you do? And we made a hard decision, I'll say.
Okay, so for aphids, you could use ladybugs for the aphids, correct? And what if you used vinegar or dilute detergent? Would that be toxic to the butterflies?
In terms of the first part, the ladybugs, they're wonderful beneficials. The one thing you have to do with beneficials is to assure them to keep them around, is to keep them a regular food source, which means you got to leave the aphids there and count on the ladybug coming and finding them and eating them. So if you're patient, hopefully you'll get some, and they'll devour a lot of them. And there are quite a few different beneficial insects. It's not just the ladybugs. The vinegar, to be honest, I don't know. But you can use, as I said, there's a thing called neem oil, NEEM, which is not really toxic, but it's rough on aphids, and you can get that at your local nursery. I would suggest that.
Okay, have you heard of a new milkweed called ball milkweed or dancing swan milkweed?
I've heard of the ball. It's a very exotic type of milkweed. It, from what I've heard, you can grow it here in Marin County, but it's a pretty exotic variety. I mean, it's even less common than the Areocarpa that I was talking about.
Would the monarchs like it, or would it?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's fine to plant if you can find it.
Yes.
Okay. Then someone else asks, would you recommend any good nectar plants?
What I would say, okay, first we talked about the need to have nectar throughout the growing season. Basically, you consider your butterfly is not a hummingbird. So it's not going to want to try to work its way into a tubular flower. So what you want are fairly flat flowers. And obviously, the more flowers, the easier it is to see the plant and to be attracted to it. So, for instance, this time of year, what I'm pleased to see in my backyard is that my woolly sunflowers are coming out. And that's one of the early flowering plants, and it's just prolific. And it's a nice, flat, bright yellow, dense clump plant. So um, that's really what you want, is just numbers and ease of access.
Okay. Someone asks, I had caterpillars on my narrow leaf milkweed into December and had monarchs hatch in February. Is this normal?
Well, no, you shouldn't have milkweed that time of year. So that's not normal, is it? Um, and so that's that issue I was talking about in the garden where I volunteer. You actually have to start cutting these things down to stop this cycle from continuing. So give them a break, give them a little time off.
So it sounds like plant your milkweed, but come the fall, cut it down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we used to be able to count on nature doing that for us. The natives would die back, but it's staying so warm that they just keep going.
Well, that is all. Oh, someone did ask. They live in Albany, and occasionally they see monarchs fly through their yard. Should they report them to the count, or does the count only happen in November?
The Thanksgiving count is right around Thanksgiving, but as I was saying, there is in the springtime a monarch mystery count, and you can go just type that in online, and it'll link you in and tell you where to send any pictures you take. And I think they even have a weekly contest. You can win a gift certificate to REI or something if you get picked.
So 2 more questions. Is it too late to plant milkweed from seed now?
If you're going to do something like a narrow leaf, it's not going to come up until April or May anyhow. So that's not an issue.
Okay. And why are some monarchs living here permanently versus migrating in the winter?
It's a nice place to live. Temperate climate, more people trying to make it a positive environment by planting milkweed and nectar bearing plants and so on. So it is, as I said earlier on, one of the theories is that more and more monarchs are just staying put instead of migrating because of the fact that, they're not getting frozen out by the cold winter weather.
So do scientists or environmentalists have a reason in mind for why the count was so high in 1998 or whenever it first started and so low in 2020?
It's just the deterioration, habitat, increased use of pesticides, climate change. You hear the same old answers again and again. We've just created an environment that is making it difficult for them to survive.
Okay. One last question, I promise. Can we put milkweed plants out in China Camp?
I don't see why not, as long as it's a county park. So I'd ask their permission before I started digging up. But
yeah. Okay. Well, Peter, that was all the questions. And thank you so much for your talk today. I think we all learned a lot about the monarch and what we can do to help them survive, if not thrive.
And I would like to thank all of you who've tuned in today to take the time to learn this, because it's important for people to know it and spread the word.
Well, thank you everyone for attending. I just want to remind you that in about a week, this will appear on the Marin County Free Library YouTube site. I put the link in, but if you have any questions, you can email me. Thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate you doing this for us.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Goodbye, everyone.